Today we have on our Mind at Work podcast a special guest, Elad Levinson, who is an expert at applying neuroscience and cognitive sciences to leadership effectiveness and has more than 40 years' experience in leadership roles in various organizations. He's held several management positions at Agilent Technologies, ICANN, and Stanford University. Elad is currently a senior advisor to many C-level leaders on strategy and incorporating the tools and skills of his multimedia program, Thriving on Change. I had the chance to meet Elad during his session at Talent Next conference, Building a Mindful Workplace in Turbulent Times. Elad, welcome to the interview.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I'm glad to be here.
Could you tell us a little about how you define mindfulness at work?
Sure. I mean, the question of what is mindfulness, one that I think has been deeply misunderstood because there's so many different definitions floating around. I think a really simple way of thinking about mindfulness is that it's an innate state that all human beings have, and that it's typified by a heightened sense of awareness of yourself in the moment. So an example would be you're sitting and you're talking with a colleague says something about another colleague. It triggers something inside of you like a danger signal. You can feel the hair on your neck and you notice it. That moment of noticing is mindfulness. And one of the tools in mindfulness, which is extremely valuable within the workplace, is being able to recognize when you're having a reaction and then being able to regulate the reaction. So instead of just kind of jumping in with both feet and saying, well, wait a minute, I don't really see that person that way. Or have you considered, instead, what you do is you just take a moment and kind of inquire with a calm mind, gee, what is the best thing for me to do right now? Maybe the best thing for me to do is just be silent.
That's definitely a way to no longer be reactive, but to be purposeful in how you behave. How can that translate into team or management skills in the workplace?
Well, one thing that you might think about is that mindfulness has relevance and efficacy at every level of the organization. There are many organizations that have incorporated mindfulness as a part of kind of brown bag lunches or their wellness programs. And I think that's an excellent way. It's targeted at the individual. It gives the individual some skills. But I think where the most return on investment is for companies is when you begin to bring mindfulness into teams and you hold teams accountable for incorporating skills of mindfulness in their daily work. And then if you bump it up one level, you could say that mindfulness is a brilliant change management intervention. So at the level of team, one of the ways that you might think about this is that people are coming together, usually virtually, and their attention is split amongst all of the emails that they have in their inbox and the conversation that's taking place on the phone and the fact that they've got a WebEx coming up in about 5 minutes, plus they have a report for their boss they really need to send them. And that kind of division of attention makes it very difficult to have really meaningful meetings online or in person because people do the same kinds of things in person. They tend to be distracted by their own interior concerns, wants, and needs. And so just a simple intervention of teaching people that when they get on the phone or they're in a WebEx, that they only concentrate on one thing, what is happening right now. And then if you add to that some good meeting management tools, like making sure that you have a robust agenda that has very clear desired outcomes, now you're beginning to really cook. And at the level of organization, my experience is that most human beings are ill-prepared for dealing with the level and complexity, breadth and scope of change that they're experiencing within their companies. And so upgrading their skills, you might think of it as really the type of intervention that I'm interested in is increasing or accelerating evolution. And mindfulness is one of 3 skill sets that really help people evolve towards being able to cope with and build capacity for the stressors that they're experiencing.
That really brings, I want to know, what are the other 2 factors?
Well, this is an interesting discovery for me. So I've been practicing mindfulness in some form since I was 23. And so like 30, 40 years. And it's always been something that's been a personal interest to me because I learned that there were many ways that I could apply mindfulness that were personally satisfying and then also really helped me change habits. And as I started incorporating and bringing mindfulness into my organizational consulting, I discovered two things. One is that awareness is the skill of being able to be aware moment by moment, and which is extremely useful because it allows you to kind of parse what's happening in the moment in real time and be able to have a little bit of objectivity. But awareness is not enough because the biggest obstacle that I see for most leaders and employees is that they don't really know how to manage their attention. Daniel Goleman wrote a brilliant book called Focus. And in his book, and really in the way that I've incorporated his book, I assume that human beings need help with being able to, first of all, direct their attention to something that's wholesome and meaningful and effective, and then secondly, be able to lift their attention off of that and place it somewhere else so that they don't have that lag time of 15 to 20 minutes where their attention is still kind of split or fragmented. And then third, to be able to have a level of focus or awareness on the greater context that you're in, because none of us exist within organizations as the term individual contributor is a joke, I mean, where everything that we do is interdependent with everybody else. So awareness, and then managing attention, which is also sometimes called focus or concentration. And a part of focus and concentration is learning how to relax, learning how to let go when it's no longer appropriate or necessary to be able to have that kind of hard, sharp, delineated focus. Then it's really an important skill to know how to let muscular tension go, how to let the kind of mental stresses relax. And then the third is really as a result of my interaction with Joseph Grenny, who's one of the founders of Crucial Conversations. I was working at Agilent as Senior Director of Learning and Development, and I observed that we had a lot of very brilliant scientists and engineers who were terrific in the lab. They were terrific in their kind of respective sciences, but they couldn't really come together as a team very skillfully because they were aversive to conflict. And the way that they tended to deal with conflict was to either kind of override what other people would say and kind of talk them down, or they would just clam up and stop talking completely. So I went looking for a program for our engineers and our scientists, and I stumbled across Crucial Conversations, went to the course, became certified, brought it into Agilent. We ended up having more than 1,500 employees go through the program. People who had said, under no circumstances would I ever have that conversation with that person. Now they were beginning to have a tool set that allowed them to be able to initiate, maintain, and conclude a conversation that had importance, that had emotional content to it, generally negative. And third, it was something that they had a difference of opinion about. And so I began to explore the question, like, how does conflict resolution fit into mindfulness and focus? Because my experience as a leader is that if you want to get anything done, you have to build goodwill. You have to ways to connect with people around their agendas and to find ways to incorporate your agenda in theirs. But you're not going to create goodwill if you don't have a true dialogue with the people that you work with. And most beings have a dialogue that's either, this is the words of Crucial Conversation, that you tend to go into silence or violence. And what they mean by that is silence would be that you try to manipulate the situation by going silent and kind of holding out for what you want, or you go to violence, which is more trying to use, well, it would be great if you used persuasion and logic, but instead, usually what you end up doing is aggressively going after your point of view without really listening to the other person's concerns or objections or how that affects them.
Wow. So when someone goes into either silence or violence, they're really creating a lot of tension within the team or whatever it is the cross-functional organization is happening.
Yes.
What are ways that a manager can use mindfulness in that kind of situation? Well,
I mean, first of all, I think that this question of what's the integration between mindfulness and conflict resolution, it bears a lot of scrutiny because human beings are wired, this is our neurobiology, to be aversive to situations where there's a potential for either verbal or otherwise kinds of aggression. And so the first thing that mindfulness does is it allows us to recognize, I'm really feeling like I have to have this conversation with so-and-so. I don't really want to have it because every time I've ever had a conversation with them in the past, they've either disregarded what I had to say or they spoke over me. Hasn't been a good experience. And so there's the recognition of the aversion. That's a mindful state. And then once you have kind of registered, like, oh, okay, I get it, I'm aversive here, then the next thing that mindfulness can do to help you is it can kind of name the concern that you're feeling. Like, oh, with inquiry, what I realize is that my past experience with this person is X, and I'm assuming that it's going to be the same way the next time that we have a conversation. That's the mindfulness piece. And then the bridge, the kind of conflict resolution is very, very skillfully organized in crucial conversations. And I'm going to quote for a moment something that Joseph said in an interview with me. So Joseph is one of the 4 founders of Vital Smarts, and they're all social psychologists or they're writers. And I said to Joseph, so tell me, is mindfulness an integral part of crucial conversations? And he laughed. And he said, without mindfulness, there are no crucial conversations. And I said, okay, good. He said, well, if you look at the methodology of how we construct a crucial conversation, it always begins with self-awareness. You first have to know what you're thinking and feeling. You have to know what you're after. And you also have to know how to regulate response to the situation. Otherwise, you're going to tend to go into silence or violence, or another way of putting it is flight or freeze. And then he expanded on that and he said, every step of the way in the 6 key in the methodology, you're always bringing mindfulness because mindfulness has a natural outgrowth, which is, I want this to work out not just for me. It's not self-centered and selfish. It's that I also want you and I to work together in such a way that when this resolution occurs, that it's something you can live with and implement, that I can live with and implement, and that it's going to make a better solution than if we just kind of bullied each other or we just went ahead and did whatever we felt like doing.
Right, because now you're focused on how can you align everyone's different interests and priorities.
Right.
I wanted to ask, how can this idea of crucial conversations and conflict resolution and aligning different people's agendas, how can that affect an organization?
Wow. So I'm going to say a few things that I know are somewhat provocative. And again, they are based on 40 plus years of direct experience, not just as a senior leader, but also in the trenches as an individual contributor. My experience is that most organizations manage conflict very badly. And the atmosphere, the culture tends to regulate conflict in a couple of different ways. One is that the landmines that are all over the organization that are just waiting to kind of blow up are the crucial conversations. And I can give you an example. We I was consulting for a software company, and they had a CTO who was the founder, who was terrific, brilliant, genius, created a piece of software that ended up being like a multi-million dollar tool. But he said, when I interviewed him, he said, I don't like managing. I really don't like taking care of other people or babysitting them. And so he was also the VP of engineering. So the resolution in that case that everybody had been avoiding was to talk to him. The senior team, the CEO and everybody else knew that he did not welcome the role of being VP of engineering, but they kept on kind of ignoring that, partly because, oh, geez, it's going to cost us a lot if we're going to hire a VP of engineering at this phase in our development, and partly because they didn't want to upset him. They didn't want him to kind of pick up his marbles and leave. In the conversation with him, I found that he was quite amenable to talking openly and authentically about the fact that he did not want to manage and that he just would like to be left alone to create and invent. That's an example of where they could have spent another year trying to make do with what they had. Instead, they moved him over to the CTO role and they hired a VP of engineering. Okay, so just one example. I think that if you look at organizations through the lens of where are the conversations that need to happen that are not happening, and that could be interlevel between, a director and above, or it could be on a team, or it could be me and my direct report. It doesn't really matter because the dynamics are all the same. There's something that needs to be said. There's a lot of emotion tied up in it. There's a difference of opinion. And oh, by the way, we both consider it really important, or all of us consider important. When you begin to integrate mindfulness at the individual level, and you help people learn how to self-regulate. You help them learn how to be self-aware and then regulate the emotional reactions that they're having to the person or the situation. And then you add to that a very comprehensive step-by-step methodology for taking the concerns or the issues or the problem and facing them directly, but facing them in such a way that it's going to lead to an effective resolution. You begin to build a culture where people trust that it's okay to have differences of opinion and that those differences of opinion are welcomed and that there's a way for individuals and teams to come to a resolution that will be effective.
That's critical. One of the things that I heard you say in the problem that faced between the CTO and the idea that once you've reached a level of success, your role may have to change within an organization. So the joy of creating and innovating software is a different skill set and talent than managing engineers.
Yep.
Which that discussion of it's time for this part of the organization to have attention and maybe the person who got us there isn't the person who'll take us to the next place. That's one of the very hard conversations. And the idea of being honest and open about things that may not always be positive, that takes a lot of initiative, and that requires a culture to value honesty in times when we're uncertain of the outcome.
Yes. I mean, I think that's really insightful, Vanessa. And I was watching, as many people are, the Netflix series called The Crown. And there's a segment in the Crown where the Queen becomes quite, I don't know, enamored is not the right word because that would suggest a romantic involvement, but more just very drawn to Billy Graham, the evangelist and crusader. And when the two of them sit down, Billy says to her, here you are, you're the head of the Anglican Church. Why are you interested in what I have to say? And she said, I crave certainty. I'm a kind of a person who wants to believe that there are some things that are just black and white. And I think what she was articulating was one of the fundamental human stressors that have become much more difficult to even approach. And that is that we're living in an age where the rule of thumb, the norm is volatility, ambiguity, meaning like no, not certainty, and a high degree of uncertainty about the future or about my role or about what we're doing or about what the product is that we're going to, and then finally, the kind of level of having to deal with the fact that all choices that we make are insufficient in terms of being able to feel confident or certain that it's exactly the right one. And so the environment that we're working in is one in which the dynamics of change are the primary motivator of whether or not people thrive or are barely surviving. And so my premise, and this is what I spoke about at the Association for Talent Development, organizations need to commit to making change as a subject one of their central training and learning areas. So you're a new employee and you're being inculcated into the culture of this organization. You, from the very beginning, you need to be given tools for rapid, ongoing change process, and that you're not going to have a level of confidence or certainty that tomorrow might not be different or probably will be different than today. And then if you kind of think of change as the centerpiece, then you start weaving in the social psychology aspect of change, like how does change affect a group of people, and how can a group of people maximize their ability to be able to work with change. Probably the best material on this is from Carl Weick at the University of Michigan in his work on high reliability organizations. His work is groundbreaking. Many organizations have incorporated healthcare, is beginning to consider it to be a core developmental process for organizations that want to reduce physician error or provider error. What Weick says is you have to make the entire organization mindful. It has to become a resident skill so that if somebody is not being mindful, they're acting in a way that is not within the kind of alignment that we have about how we do things, then somebody needs to learn how to confront that because they see what the other person is not seeing.
That's interesting that you talk about the idea of high reliability, because I consider high reliability to be deliverables. And the method that you get there may be in question. The team, the timing may be in question and fluctuate, but the end result is what would be the goal to be concrete. What could a leader or a team manager do to have mindfulness in that process to becoming highly reliable in the face of change and uncertainty?
Well, first of all, the basis of the research that's been done on this is in situations where the errors lead to fatalities. So this is air traffic controllers have gone through HRO training, healthcare providers, SWAT teams, firefighters. These are, and also the military has used it extensively. There's a terrific article by an admiral in the Navy who talks about how they incorporated high reliability organizational methodology and really improved the quality of their operational accuracy. Part of the question is, what are you rewarding, right? I mean, if what you're rewarding is zero defects or zero errors, and if you're rewarding the individuals to take or to have a conversation when the norm of mindfulness is being broken, and if you make it a kind of cultural imperative that everybody within the team or within the organization is committed to that zero defects or zero errors, then it becomes a part of the conversational process. People begin to talk about what they are learning or what they're doing that's encouraging them to be more aware in situations where being mindless could lead to a fatality.
I could see how that would be, especially in those high risk situations, if there's a fire or an airplane landing. Those are things that have dramatic repercussions immediately in terms of safety and health.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But here's another example. If you go on the Vital Smarts website, they have a white paper that they did in conjunction with the operating room nurses. And I think they interviewed like 1,500 nurses around the country. And they asked them the question, first of all, how many fatalities within the hospital are caused by provider error and that could have been preventable? And then secondly, what they heard was that there were a significant percentage of deaths that occurred because nurses were unwilling to confront or call physicians and ask them to change orders or ask them to do something because of the way that the physician would respond to those requests. And so when they began to get trained in crucial conversations, one of the things they saw was a decrease in the response rate of physicians basically blowing off the nurse or whoever it was who would be making a request of them that they either didn't want to comply with, or they just were either too lazy or they had too much else that they thought was more important. In a situation like that, the way that the culture begins to be built is around something that is meaningful to the organization. It doesn't have to be a dramatic organizational goal. You could have an organizational goal to reduce to zero defects or bugs in software. And that becomes the focus of your high reliability organizational methodology. And so what begins to happen is that people within a software development process begin to talk to each other much more in the way that's articulated in agile methodology, where people really take each other to task and they talk about the things that are difficult to talk about, because the goal in an agile meeting is to expedite the software development moving forward while at the same time not sacrificing quality.
That's a great perspective. The stories that you are sharing with me reminds me of Atul Gawand's book, The Checklist Manifesto. He also did research to find that when a nurse is uncomfortable saying something to a physician or a surgeon, errors are more likely to be made, even if they're noticed.
Yes.
So you have the awareness of something that's happening, but because there is that conflict, like we were speaking about earlier, it doesn't get brought to light in an accepting way.
Exactly.
And that is a cultural change that has to start with the leadership and the top of an organization to have that become a value and a principle of how to do things to move forward.
Well, I have a very good example. A very close friend of mine is married to someone who has been working for JCR, so that's a Joint Commission Review. So she goes in and she does pre-audits of hospitals and clinics, getting them ready for Joint Commission auditing process. The Joint Commission is if you fail, you lose accreditation. So this is not something that you can blow off or you can postpone. It's crucial to the well-being of the organization. And she became interested in HRO on her own. I didn't introduce it to her, something she had learned about. And so she began to incorporate some of the teaching in the methodology of high reliability organizations. What she found out was that it was very rare for senior leadership teams to be willing to take on the training and the culture change that was required to be able to maximize the kind of error-free environments that they were required, or at least the reduction in errors that are required by an audit. You have this very interesting characteristic about human nature, which is that we resist change even though change is the norm, right? I think that any time that you want to teach people or you want to encourage a culture change, you really have to think about how long it takes realistically for an organization to align behind something as complex and deep as crucial conversations, mindfulness, awareness, HRO. I found in my organizational interventions where I've been the leader of a change management initiative that you really have to commit to 3 years. You have to say, okay, look, for 3 years, we are going to build a parallel organizational structure that slowly begins to move us as an organization in the directions that we say we want to go. And along the way, we're going to intervene at the level of compensation. We're going to intervene at the level of performance management. We're going to intervene at the level of development of people. Every aspect of the organization really has to be examined for how it either is misaligned or not aligned, or could be aligned or needs to be aligned with the initiative. And that's in a world where short-term thinking and instant gratification are so much a part of our cultural heritage that we have at this time, it's rare to find a senior leader or senior leadership team that's really committed to that. Now, I happen to be on the board of an organization called Petaluma Health Center, which serves the poorest of the poor. This is an organization that was started back when Lyndon Johnson brought in the war on poverty. It's the only thing besides Head Start that has survived all of the multiple budget cuts. 1 out of 14 people go to federally qualified healthcare centers. They're kind of the last resort where you can get healthcare. The one that I'm a board member, the CEO and her team are deeply committed to being a high reliability organization. And it's remarkable to watch how an organization that has as much stress as any single organization anywhere because of the regulatory, constant new regulations from RISA or funding sources that are endangered. I mean, it's a constant battle with very, very difficult stressors. And then add to that Sonoma having these massive fires where one of the health centers that had been serving 10,000 people a month burned down. I've watched them now for 4 years. And they are an example of how it could be done right. It's remarkable to watch that everything that they do is really from the perspective that we can continuously improve the quality of our providers, our operations, our facilities, and they go at it. They just go at it. And everything is evidence-based. Everything is data. Dashboards. They have a read on every area of the organization is transparent. Now, to me, it's wonderful to see in practice that these kind of lofty principles of mindfulness and dealing with things difficult directly can not only be implemented, but they can be implemented in a way that patients regard the organization as being superior, stellar, a place they really like to go to for healthcare, and that providers flock to work there in an area where it's very difficult to recruit physicians.
That is a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing so much about what the organization is like. It brings to point something that when we talk about we're in a short-term driven culture, so many things are driven by the next quarterly report or the next release date. But I think the complement to that, to thinking long term, is when you have a clear mission that you are striving towards. Mm-hmm. That mission can become timeless. Mm-hmm. And when you have something that's timeless, it's easier to put in perspective the kind of commitments to make as an organization and to do the step-by-step granular building of something that can change how a culture is built. Yeah.
Well, you're really putting your finger, of course, on one of the most important characteristics of organizations that human beings gravitate towards and report that they're happy to work at. And those are the ones that have found a way to take what it is that the organization does, whether it's a service or a product or both, and really inject meaning into it. You know, meaning being delight and satisfaction of customers, or meaning being that we work in harmony with vendors and suppliers and the entire community. And there are examples of organizations that you're pointing to in pretty much every sector in the world. It isn't really just those that are very obvious, like healthcare, where you can say, wow, yeah, that mission is something I can really get behind.
Right. That could happen anywhere, yes. Any kind of mission. It can affect industries that don't even exist yet in terms of can we reach people and serve to make something a better experience, a better human being, a better mindset, or a better environment? There's always something that can be aligned with at a higher level to say, okay, the commitments that I'm making are striving towards something. And I think that's the role of a leader or a manager of a team, is to shine the light of where that is. Because when you have that and everyone can see it, it's easier for people to get into the same direction and move toward it.
Yes. Yes, and I just think of the Harvard Business Review article that Dan Goleman received the very prestigious recognition for being like the best leadership article of 2016 or 2015, where he talks about that a leader's role is to manage the focus of the organization. And I think that, I'm thinking about leaders that I've worked with, and then myself, whenever I've gone into a situation where I'm rebuilding a team, or I'm taking a team and developing it, the first thing I do is always to look at, like, why are we doing what we're doing? How does this benefit people in a much broader context than just simply that we're pushing this paper through this bureaucracy? Because it serves something somewhere, and that somewhere generally are people, right? They're the ones who are being served. And if you can really remind yourself that you have this connection to the outside world, and that this isn't just your own little cocoon that you're in, but that the work that you do actually has meaning in a larger way, then you've got the beginnings of an alignment process that you can begin to bring in these evolutionary tools like mindfulness and conflict resolution.
That's wonderful. It reminds me of Simon Sinek's TED Talk and book, Start With Why. Mm-hmm. When you're aligned to the reason behind things, it's easier to get the direction and the momentum to move toward it.
Yes.
Elad, this has been an insightful and a inspiring time to spend with you today. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Could you tell us a little bit about your course that you briefly mentioned when you did the interview with Joseph Grenny, your course called Thriving on Change?
Sure. Thriving on Change is a video-based program that somebody can download with a key, and it goes into each of the three areas that I articulated: awareness, attention, and conflict resolution. Actually, it's not the way that I name it in the course. The third area is called Cultivating Goodwill, because I wanted to articulate what it is that is the end result of good conflict resolution. And you could say, oh, yeah, well, we'll have increased results and things will be. But actually, what happens when there's a really good resolution to a conflict is that you build relationship, you build goodwill between people. So each of the three areas are, first of all, there's some kind of brief lectures on what it is, how to see it in the organization. But mostly the program is really aimed at building tools and skills. If you were to open the box, or if you thought about it as like if you were a fisher person and you love to fish, you'd open it up and you'd see all these flies and things. Or if you sew, you'd open it up and you'd see all these materials that you use for sewing. The course is just rich with tools and skill building in the three areas. So it really goes beyond the point of a lecture or a cognitive understanding. It goes right to the heart of what did I have to learn as a leader to be able to lead an organization, people, to turn organizations around, to be a change management effective coach and consultant. And how is it for the person inside the organization to learn this and then apply it? So it's very, very practical. The starting point for me in any interest that people have in knowing more about me or knowing more about my consulting or coaching or about the program Thriving and Change is my preference that they either call me or write me. I'm very, very personable, and I really prefer an initial contact not to be a cold one where somebody just sends in an inquiry, but rather take the risk and give me a call and let's talk. So if they want to call, my phone number is 707-779-9190. If they want to write, it's elad.levinson@gmail.com. And I promise that I'll respond very quickly to phone calls or to emails.
That's wonderful. Getting to spend time with you and the conversations that we have had a positive effect on my life and how I lead the work that I'm doing.
Thank you.
So I'm really looking forward to people being able to be comfortable to reach out to you to create a personal connection. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.